Welcome, happy warriors. Welcome to the Rabbi Daniel Lapin Show, where I, your rabbi, solemnly dedicate myself to revealing for you how the world really works. Thanks for being part of the show, and thank you so much for remembering the credo of the happy warrior, the type of listener for whom this show is designed. The happy warrior is somebody who recognizes that regardless of the turbulence that might be swirling around the foundations of your being, turbulence of a political kind, turbulence of military, turbulence of economic. There are all kinds of macro problems that are doing their best, if we can ascribe living motivations to inanimate organisms. They're doing their best to disrupt you from your mission. There are viruses, and I'm speaking about intellectual viruses just as much as biological viruses, and all of them are trying to prevent you from taking care of business. They're trying to prevent you remaining focused on the things that you have to stay connected to. Because regardless of how desperately and deeply you desire to join the bigger fight, you can only do so effectively from a solid foundation, and the solid foundation is indeed your 5 Fs. Your family, your finances, your faith, your friendships, and your fitness. If you're not going to take care of those things first, then you're not much use to the army over there. And so let's carry on with the show as I start off by telling you what is the really only hard thing about doing the show for you every week. People occasionally ask me, how do you manage to do it? And the answer is that the feedback from all of you, the emails I get from you all, and you do that at my website, by the way, at rabbidaniellapin.com, rabbidaniellapin.com, and About Us is the tab, and you'll be at Contact Us. I get to read them. That sort of feedback I find enormously encouraging. As I've said in the past, I greatly prefer the medium of podcasting to terrestrial radio as I used to do it, and the only drawback is that with terrestrial radio, the phone-ins gave you some feedback, so there was interaction. And over here, I've become accustomed to survive on the time delay of the interaction. So right now, I'm speaking, and because I read a bunch of your emails this morning, and I read some last night, and I read some 2 days ago, my soul is filled with an awareness of you there listening. And that makes today's job ever so much easier. And so thank you very much indeed for keeping me going in that way. So that's not the hard part. When people sometimes say, so, what's the hardest part of doing this regular weekly podcast? I'll tell you what it is. First of all, let me just explain that this is not a show where I'm telling you what to do, right? In no way is that part of what this is about. At no point am I saying to you what you should be doing. I'm not giving you directions in any way whatsoever. And all I'm doing is what? All I'm doing is providing you with a glimpse into what the 19th century German philosophers used to call a Weltanschauung. A Weltanschauung. Literally, it means a worldview, and that's a pretty good translation. I'm giving you a glimpse into a very specific worldview. Now, what is a worldview? A worldview is a format of the world through your eyes that pretty much explains everything that you encounter in the world, or at least that's what a worldview should do. And what those German philosophers were trying to do, and anybody who has a worldview, is you like it to explain things. And the truth is that each and every one of us can become disoriented and even alienated when we feel we don't get what's going on. All right, it's heaven forbid, when someone's in a car accident, they say, I saw things happening slowly. What's happening is your brain speeds up as it's trying to process things that are happening. Right? A car isn't supposed to be flying towards you upside down. You're not supposed to be feeling things in your car flying around and hitting you on the back of your head, and you're trying to process all of that. And when you can't, one of the things that helps to sort of throw us into a state of shock where we haven't necessarily suffered blood loss or any of the really critical damage that is going to end up causing that, but you still get into shock simply because your worldview is broken down. Your ability to process what you see, your ability to understand the world around you has broken down. Now, all of us, given enough time, are able to integrate information and make sense of it. But in terms of a broad overview, that's what a worldview or a Weltanschauung is. It really ought to explain pretty much everything that you come across in the world. And certainly everything that is life-impacting, everything that is important. Now, let me clarify, there are many worldviews. I only present you one, which I think is a very good one, but that's just my opinion. I urge you to look at worldviews and weigh them up and make your own judgments. So there is the worldview of a deeply religious, Quran-believing Islamic devotee. All right, I'm not going to use the word radical or anything like that because I'm just not sufficiently familiar with Islamic theology to step into that area. I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to say that Islam provides a worldview. How do I know without knowing the theology? Because it wouldn't have attracted the deep commitment of so many people if it didn't provide a worldview. All right, your tennis club does not have millions of members because it doesn't provide the most basic of all human needs of the spiritual side of things. Right? Once our physical needs are taken care of, the most urgent spiritual need we have is for a Weltanschauung, for a world view. And your tennis club doesn't provide that. But obviously Islam must do in order to attract so many devotees and to retain their fealty. So there's no question about it. There's such a thing called the Islamic worldview, in which the rise and fall of the West makes sense, and in which the role of oil under Arab sand makes sense. And so it is with every other thing about the world. If you look at it through Muslim eyes, it absolutely makes sense. Then you've got a worldview that I think of as Marxist, communistic, progressive. Now, those are just differences of degree. But that is a worldview. Now, there are failures in the Muslim worldview. I'm not going to go into what they are, but there are aspects of the Muslim worldview that are incorrect, obviously. There are also aspects of the Marxist, communist, progressive worldview that are incorrect. When I say incorrect, that's not your rabbi passing judgment, saying, I'm saying they're incorrect. No, they're incorrect because they contain inescapable internal contradictions. And I won't go into what they are in Islam, but what they are in the communist, Marxist, progressive worldview, right, is clear. There's certain problems, and you'll see that politicians who subscribe to that worldview always run into those difficulties, whether it was Lenin and Stalin in the Soviet Union, and in other words, the communist, progressive, socialist worldview most often runs up against reality in the financial economic arena. And that's where even the most ardent and committed Marxist, communist, progressive believer has to scratch his head and struggle to find a way to reconcile contradictions, which ultimately do not reconcile because the worldview contains with it fundamental problems within it that are irreconcilable. And so there's such thing as the worldview of the Bushman in the Kalahari Desert in Namibia, Southwest Africa. He has a worldview. By the way, as an aside here, let me recommend that when you're in the mood for just a delightful little movie, it's 40 years old, for heaven's sake. It's been around for the longest time, so maybe you've seen it, but it's called The Gods Must Be Crazy. It's produced by a South African filmmaker called Jamie Ace, and he produced it, he wrote it, he directed it, and it's just a nice little thing. I've spoken about it before, and I'm not going to describe it now, but if you have a chance to rent it or view it on one of the online, you'll enjoy it. But one of the nice things is it shows that the Bushmen have their worldview. And when a pilot drops an empty Coke bottle out of his light airplane, and those bottles were robust, it fell to the ground and didn't break, and one of these Bushmen picked it up, his worldview explained why this shiny glass object, the likes of which he's never seen before, suddenly put in an appearance. His worldview explained it, and it's so interesting to see. By the way, one of the things that I find entertaining is that from time to time, when there are movies I find interesting, I want to find out what the Marxist, progressive, communist worldview says about those movies. And one of the easy ways of doing it is just to read the New York Times the New York Times movie review, and there you get it, no problem. Well, what they said about The Gods Must Be, they said a whole lot, but the thing I'll just catch now is the film is patronizing towards Bushmen. What does this even mean, right? Patronizing, what does that mean? I truly don't know what the critique of patronizing means in the context of that movie, but I presume that what the movie does, and it very clearly does do this, is contrast Western culture and Bushman culture, or, if you like, contrast Western worldview with the Bushman worldview. And it goes without saying that a Western worldview is more correctly replicative of reality than a Bushman worldview is. But apparently saying that is patronizing. Now, what a word like that is even doing in a movie review, I find absolutely fascinating. But anyway, there it is. Intent on pursuing that line of thinking, by the way, I did see that cultural anthropologists have condemned the movie, and then I thought I should probably also just mention a cultural anthropologist. Okay, please don't for a moment let anybody try and persuade you that a cultural anthropologist is a scientist. It isn't. It isn't at all. Cultural anthropology is pure politics, and today the field has been twisted into just another arm, a propaganda arm for the communist, Marxist, progressive worldview. I've spoken in the past about a very great cultural anthropologist of the first part of the 20th century called Joseph Daniel Unwin, U-N-W-I-N, Unwin. And one of the best proofs that the field has been co-opted to become the propaganda arm of the Marxist, progressive, communist worldview project is that they have cancelled Joseph Daniel Unwin. So you can go into the university today, you'll be hard pushed to find his books in the anthropology library on most universities just because they don't like what he had to say. I've spoken about him in previous podcasts, and one of the main things they don't like about him is that he points out that of the 5,000 extant cultures in the world, and he really did study them, that's what he devoted his life to, the only requirement for a culture to succeed and become a civilization is monogamous marriage. Well, needless to say, that is not terribly popular. So, anyways, science means that you can show anybody the reality. If I want to show that 3 + 2 = 5, I don't care if you're a bushman from Namibia or you're a Mongol from the Asian steppes. It doesn't matter. As long as we have a common language, we can sit down and look at 3 pebbles and then add 2 pebbles, and we'll both agree that there are 5 pebbles at the end. If we don't, we'll just make sure that we are both relying on the base 10 numbering system, and that you're not on the base 7 and I'm on the base 10. But when we've clarified that we're on the same numbering system, that is then a provable statement. So this is mathematics, it's science, it's easy. I can prove that ice is colder than fire, right? Or if we don't have agreed upon words to describe those sensations, we can simply say, all right, let's put our hands close to the fire. The sensation we feel is woggly, and now let's put our hands on ice, and the sensation we feel is wiggly. And so wiggly and woggly are at opposite ends of the temperature scale, and so it goes. These are things that people will agree on. But I assure you that there's nothing in the field of cultural anthropology that we all agree on. And that's one of the reasons we know it's simply not a science at all. And if there is no comprehensive framework of reality, in other words, a worldview, then it's very difficult for there to be humor. What I'm trying to say is that if a tramp slips on a banana peel, it's sad. It's pathetic. But when a pompous politician slips on a banana peel, it's funny. Now, if that social hierarchy doesn't exist, then neither does the humor of one of those situations. It's only because there is a standardized framework that defines the worldview of the people within that culture that we can have humor. But if the worldview is in itself that there are no unbreakable rules, which is among the principles of the worldview of Marxist, communist, progressive thinking, then it's very difficult for there to be humor, because many categories of humor depend on religion. Well, you've taken religion away. It's no longer there. You can mock it, but some of the more subtle forms of humor, the priest and the minister and the rabbi walk into the bar sort of thing. But if there aren't any priests or ministers or rabbis, then that form of humor has completely gone away. There's a form of humor that revolved around, scatological bathroom or sexual humor, but the key underpinning of that humor is that people and animals are different. But once the left has established that people and animals are just different points on the spectrum of existence on the planet, then that area of humor falls away. And so it goes. Just part of the things that bring enjoyment to life, like the ability to laugh, a lot of that goes away in some worldviews, such as a Marxist communist worldview. Now, my own worldview is a biblical worldview through the eyes of ancient Jewish wisdom. And this has informed generations of Jews. It's guided the people of Israel in good times and in bad times. It's guided them in wonderful, hospitable, comfortable countries and societies, and it's guided them in terrifying, tyrannical regimes. And throughout of that, it has helped Jews build strong and durable families and build strong and durable finances. I know that in parts of New York, particularly areas in which Susan Lappin grew up, and other parts in Queens, it was quite well known, particularly among Italian families and among other people as well, that if you can get your daughter married to a Jewish guy, you'll be well off. And I remember talking to a mom that I'd met, a Catholic lady in Brooklyn, and we were chatting, and I said, tell me about your children. She told me she's got 2 daughters. What do you dream of for them? She looked at me and she laughed. She said, I hope you're not going to be offended, but I keep telling them to marry a Jewish man. And I smiled and I said, well, that might be a little bit different from the advice that Jewish man's mother is giving him, because she'd like him to marry somebody who's Jewish. And she said, well, I don't mind if my daughters convert to Judaism. That's fine. Well, all right, but that wasn't what interested me. I was curious as to why she was saying what she said. Why is that, she said. I said to her. And she said, well, Jewish husbands are good to their wives. They don't physically abuse them. They don't beat them. And they don't get drunk. And they're ambitious and they work hard. And so she says, why wouldn't I want my daughter to have a husband like that? Okay, that is part of this whole idea, that there is a coherent worldview that springs from the Bible that Jews have adopted into their lives over many, 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 many generations. And that particular worldview is the one I share on this show. It's not, as I say, I'm not debating anybody about it. This is what I share for those who are interested. Here it is. I'm ready to lay it out. I answer questions online. I provide elaboration. You can become a happy warrior. And that's also on the website, by the way. You want to become a happy warrior, I send you a free ebook that speaks about more of this in practical context, and that's what I do, right? And I don't have time to argue or debate. I feel it speaks for itself in my case. And so, here it is. Obviously, it's not for everybody, because, well, if it was, there'd be even more regular listeners to the show than there are already. And I'm not ungrateful. We have a terrific audience and a growing audience. But if this was the answer for everybody, well, okay, pretty obvious, right? So back to how I started. What is the hardest part of the show for me? The hardest part of the show for me is telling you things that are true, but which fly in the face of every single cultural message that I know that you've been subjected to. One of the things people say to me more often than anything else is, I wish I knew what you've taught me recently when I was 20 years old. And I hear that very often, right? Why didn't I know these things when I was making important life decisions? Well, there's a show of a couple of years back where I speak about the years between 13 and 23, those 10 years in the life of a boy. Somebody has since asked me to talk about, well, what are the relevant messages for the life of a girl early on, and there are, and I will do that. I focused on the boys because it is so much more difficult. The impact of non-acculturated boys on a society is devastating. The impact of non-acculturated girls is not great, but it isn't as bad. Although, interestingly enough, for the first time in American history, and I'm just going to confine it to the United States of America for the moment, but wherever you're listening, you can easily make the cultural translation for your own area. But for the first time now in American, speak about sociology, this is the first time we're finding women, young women, engaged in street violence. where beatings criminal beatings and assaults are being administered by women. This is very new. Why is it happening now? Well, because we have coarsened the lives of women. Most of these women are not and were never raised by a man. They were raised only by a woman, an unmarried single mother, raised most of these women who are out there beating up and joining in assaults on innocent people. Right now, I see it happening a lot in the New York area to people of Asian descent, and this is the result. After you've got several generations of women raised by single moms, you've got several generations of women who've been told that taking the life of an unborn baby is not significant at all, and eventually the message does seep in, and you find out that you have created a generation of nightmarish young women. Very, very problematic for a society. Now, it takes quite a while for that damage to develop. The damage to a society by unacculturated men happens far more visibly and far more rapidly. And so, obviously, for many years already now, we have seen that how much damage is being wreaked on the streets of society by young males who did not get a proper 10 years between the ages of 13 and 23. So telling you things that are true, but are completely at odds with everything you've heard and everything you've been told, okay, it's a problem because most of us are disposed to believe authority. Again, the world becomes a very uncertain and perhaps even frightening place if we believe that even authority is unreliable, which at the moment increasingly large numbers of people in the United States of America are beginning to believe that authority is unreliable. The authorities. That phrase is found very often in European newspapers. The body was left until the authorities could arrive, things like that. You're starting to see it more in the United States as well. But to some extent, and I think there's some credibility to this, and that is that the authorities are all very much on board the COVID train. And I think part of that is because it helps to restore the power of authority. So just when people were beginning to say to themselves, I just don't know if you can really trust the media. I don't know if can you really trust the political system? Along comes COVID, and my goodness, right? All you have to trust is the governor and the state government and the mayor, and the newspapers are telling you how many people died of COVID in the last 24 hours. Well, yeah, I can see that for authority, those who see themselves and are in fact a part of the authority structure of society, they actually do say, this is a good thing. We've got to keep this COVID stuff going because it helps people remember they need us to be in charge. Do you remember all the dire predictions when the year 2000 was going to come around? America was going to stop, the buses wouldn't work, the power would go off, computers would stop operating. And one of the very disturbing discoveries to authority on January the 1st, 2020 was that, people actually can manage pretty well by themselves. If everyone takes care of his own bus and his own computer and his own job, pretty much everything worked. There was no problem, even though computers hadn't been designed to automatically switch into 2000. No problem. It all worked fine. And it's a very uncomfortable feeling if you're in authority to discover that those you see yourself in authority over can manage without you. Look, on a very minor level, and this is not a negative thing at all, but parents have authority over their children. It is meant to be that way. It works better. The world functions when that exists. One of the damaging things of a Marxist, communist, progressive worldview is that it endeavors to strip parents of their authority over their children. It endeavors to give children equal power as the parents. And there are many different ways in which it seeks to do that, but to drive a wedge between parents and children and to erode the traditional family structure and to undercut the authority of parents over children, very much a part of the communist, progressive, Marxist worldview. But when most parents go through this, when your children reach a certain age and they flex their muscles and they stretch their wings, and all of a sudden you realize you don't have authority over them. Now, if you've done a great job, you don't mind because you're proud of the decisions they make. But if it's a little uncertain, it's a very disturbing time for parents to discover they have no authority over their children anymore. And it's exactly like that for people who have a deep yearning to wield power over other people, right? And it's a very, very seductive feeling. It is one of the nice things of being a parent, I'll tell you. It's a reality. We say, well, it's wonderful being responsible for all these beautiful little people. Being responsible means having power and control and authority over them, which you're supposed to have. I'm not criticizing it at all. It's good. Parents are supposed to wield authority over their children. Doesn't mean it doesn't feel nice. It does, and that's why you miss it when it goes away. Well, it's exactly like that with political power. It's exactly like that with military power. It's exactly like that with economic power. The ability to wield power over other people is very, very appealing, very seductive, and you do everything you can to preserve and protect that power if you have it. And so one of the reasons, people sometimes say to me, you're a little bit of you're a COVID denier, which, by the way, is the usual phrase. You're a climate change denier. Where this came from is because in a way with which I disagreed vehemently at the time, many Jewish organizations tried to turn Holocaust denial into a crime. They succeeded in places like Canada and places like Germany. I believe I'm correct on that, and if I'm wrong, some of you will correct me, but I believe in both those countries it is a crime. People go to jail for denying the Holocaust. So freedom of speech, the very thing that Jews always used to stand for, freedom of speech and no censorship, gets put aside when it came to this particular sad issue. And anybody who questions whether 6 million Jews died at the hand of the Nazis during the 20th century is a Holocaust denier. And the idea was to cloak the term denier with such opprobrium and such awful flavor and such a stink that nobody would ever want to be called a denier. And once that had been established, it became possible to speak about those who are skeptical about the human role in global warming, or even whether there's global warming at all, as much of the United States shivers in a frigid winter storm. To do so is to be called a climate denier. By the way, I am a climate denier. And then it's also been used COVID denier. So why? What do you care? Well, because one of the things that the COVID crisis has done to the United States of America, and also in many other countries around the world, it's turned bureaucrats into petty tyrants. We get to close your businesses. We get to make you wear masks. We get to exert an enormous amount of power over your day-to-day life. And so we like the existence of this epidemic. It allows us to retain, but even more importantly than allowing us to retain our power and our influence, it actually does something else. And that is, it restores America's commitment to accepting authority, believing the media. And that is exactly what it's done. It's really important to be aware of this, that once you've heard something, once something has got into your soul, you tend to believe it. Where there's smoke, there's fire, right? If they're talking about it, it must be true. That's what we're told. So let me tell you a really important principle from ancient Jewish wisdom, and it can be very effective and very useful for you, both in terms of raising your children, taking care of your business, your interactions with other people. Let me tell it to you. Here's the rule. When you allow information to penetrate into you, it is there, never to be dislodged. That information that you allowed into you has helped shape you, and shape you it does, even if your conscious intent is to reject it. It's really important to know that. So you listen to something and you say, yeah, it's fine if I listen to this because I just don't believe it. So please know that little by little, a tiny bit at the time, it scrapes away at your skepticism. And if you believe something you know to be false and you hear it again and again and again, you start lessening your disbelief. I can't emphasize this strongly enough. Letting information into you has an impact even if your conscious mind intends to reject it. Now, this is one of the reasons that advertising works. Right? You see a picture of something. You weren't thinking of buying the thing. It wasn't in the back of your mind. You hadn't even thought of it. But it plants a seed. And advertising people know that, you don't get a lot of impact from just one advertisement. But if you can make that advertisement be seen by your prospect several times, each time it erodes the skepticism, each time it takes away the doubt, until finally you actually do get a significant number of the people who saw your ad to act on it. Because you cannot get rid of information that gets into you. It's always there. Not consciously, but it's there. Very much there. You might be interested in where this point, where it shows up in ancient Jewish wisdom. For those of you who aren't, you can skip ahead for 3 minutes or 2.5 minutes. But where it comes from is the second book of Samuel, chapter 16, verse 1. What's going on is, as you know, David is on his way to becoming king. The former king, King Saul, is trying to kill him, realizing, of course, that once David becomes king, that is the end of Saul and his line. Happens to be that David's best friend is Saul's son Jonathan. Saul's son Jonathan has a son called Mephibosheth, and Mephibosheth has a servant called Ziva. And in second book of Samuel, chapter 16, verse 1, David is trying to assemble his people and to build up his force, and he's asked for everyone who supports him to come and join him. And this guy Ziva shows up with all kinds of supplies, and David says, "Where's your master, Mephibosheth, the son of my good friend Jonathan?" And Ziva, this treacherous servant, lies and says that his boss, Mephibosheth, is really staying with King Saul. He's not coming with David. Nothing could have been less true. Mephibosheth was a cripple. He couldn't walk and move quickly, so he had sent Ziva along ahead to say, "Hey, David, I'm coming as quickly as I can, but meanwhile, here's my servant with the supplies." The treacherous servant hands over the supplies as if it's his own donation, and he says, "Yeah, Mephibosheth's not coming. He's joined Saul." David is extremely upset and says, "Fine. Well, when this fighting is over, you will take over all of Mephibosheth's empire, his estate. He's from the royal family. He's got property." And so which is exactly what Ziva was hoping for. And so David says, "When I become king and all this fighting is over, you will take over your former boss's estate." Okay. Chapter 19, verse 26. Finally, Mephibosheth shows up. "And here I am, my master David. I'm here to do everything I can to help you ascend the throne of Israel." And David is taken aback. He said, I wasn't expecting you. I was told that you had joined the other side. And Mephibosheth said, look, my servant was treacherous. He lied. He told you that I wasn't. It's not true. How could you even doubt me for a moment? Of course I'm with you as my father is with you. You know that. And King David said, yeah, tell you what, you and Ziva split your estate. You each get half. Isn't that incredible? David should have taken Ziva and executed him. And said to Mephibosheth, look, I gave an edict that your estate will go to Ziva. I'm executing him. He's dead. Your estate is yours. I'm sorry. I should never have doubted you. But he didn't do that. And we're talking about the great David. This is the guy that God chose to be the king of Israel. So he's not a nobody. Right? This is not you or me. This is a giant among people. A person of huge greatness. And even he was not able to get out of his being that information that he had been betrayed by Mephibosheth. He knows it's not true. He sees Mephibosheth there now with his own eyes. But he can't completely get out of his heart that initial feeling he got when the treacherous servant Ziva told him that Mephibosheth wasn't coming. And he can't change. This is such an important point. And it's a point which you will find useful. Be aware that everything that your children hear leaves a mark. Be aware that everything that you say to your spouse leaves a mark. It never actually ever completely goes away. A really important point. And above all, with yourself. Each of us has to be aware that we should guard what comes into our ears and into our eyes, because there is no erasing it. It then is a part of who we are. You know, people are often fond of saying, what you eat, right? Eat carefully, eat organic food. I don't believe in organic food. It costs more and usually isn't nearly as good as the other food, but that's just me. I'm an organic food denier. But people who are promoting organic food say, you are what you eat. All right, yes, and I don't deny that. You are. But I think that means that we ought to add a spiritual element to how we eat. And that's because there's a big difference between being filled and being fulfilled. And eating is as much a spiritual activity as it's a physical activity. That's why we have things like comfort foods, and that's why a bond is formed between a mother and a child when the child nurses at the mother. And that is why we correctly identify many eating disorders as psychological, having to do with the soul at origin. Eating is a spiritual as much as it is physical. If eating was only about getting enough nutrition for your body, then you could just pop tablets. But the very fact that there are dozens of food cooking chef programs on television, the whole thing of the preparation of food is surrounded with mystery and importance, and there's locally sourced foods and imported foods, and there's a whole list of things that have to do with eating. If eating was only about sustaining the body, well, then nobody would care about that. That's not what it's about. Just eat. But it isn't. Food is meant to provide, and works best when it provides spiritual as well as physical sustenance. And if you are a materialist, if you reject the idea of a spiritual reality, well, then you are depriving yourself of a great deal of the benefit of the process of eating. That's why we enjoy a meal better when it's with friends, and we enjoy a meal more when it's not emptying a can into our mouths, but we sit at a table with crockery and cutlery and a tablecloth. All of these have to do with the spiritual aspect of eating. Saying a blessing before a meal or after a meal and after a meal, these are spiritual parts of it. What's the point of it? Well, the danger is that without that, you don't seek to be fulfilled, you only seek to be filled. And that means that obesity waits around the corner. Because if you're going to eat and eat and eat and eat in the hope of reaching a state of satiation, it never comes, because part of what you're looking for is spiritual satiation as well as physical. And you can't possibly reach that feeling of satisfaction if you've banished the spiritual, if you depend only on the physical. So, spiritual is very much an important part of the process of eating as well. So that's why it makes sense to say we are what we eat. Sure, that's true. But we are also what we hear and what we see, just as much. And it's very much worthwhile being aware of that and taking it into account in terms of how we eat and what we eat, what we see, how we see it, what we hear, the information we allow ourselves to see, whether it's in entertainment or whether it's in news media. Filtering what we get is worthwhile thinking about, only because you have to know that the effect stays. There are certain chemicals. I think arsenic is one of them. I may be wrong, but there are certain chemicals that never leave the body, and so they do tend to accumulate. And some of them are toxic. So some toxic things you take in very small quantities, they pass through you, they're gone. But the ones that linger and stay in the body, that's a different story. Now they accumulate, and it can become very problematic. Well, everything you hear, everything you see, all that information, all that data does remain, and it accumulates. So just be aware of that. Now, as I said, this is one of the hard things about my job, right? Because I know that what I've just told you is initially, it sounds bizarre because a lot of the information you get is materialistic in origin. And if somebody would say, give me scientific proof that what you've just said is true, I would say, give me proof that your refrigerator or your freezer is keeping food fresh using an oven thermometer. And you say, well, it's the wrong instrument. An oven thermometer won't move if you put it in the freezer. You need a freezer thermometer. And I say exactly the same. So to ask me to prove this using the instrument of science, of course that doesn't work. Science can't prove everything. Science is very limited. Science describes things. It can't even explain everything. But it certainly can't prove certain things. If it could, we'd be able to develop scientific instruments that could predict which people would fall in love with which other people, and it would predict which people are honest and which people are not. These are not physical things. They can't be measured with science. They're spiritual. And for spiritual things, they can only be measured by a spiritually sensitive human being. And so as people train themselves to become spiritual, they are more aware of these things and your ability to read other human beings. There's no instrument that'll tell you whether these two people are good together, but if there is a strongly developed spiritual sensitivity, well, then you would be able to. That would make a big difference. And there's no instrument that can tell if such a person is honest. But again, if you've spent time developing spiritual sensitivity, so you're a balanced person, aware and understanding of both the physical and the spiritual, well then, that's pretty good. That's not bad at all. That is how it works. And it's well worthwhile being aware of that. So that's the hard part of my job, telling you things like what I've just told you, while at the same time realizing that it flies in the face of what all the propaganda to which we're all subjected all the time. At any rate, that is as far as we're going to be able to go. Actually, I'll tell you something else that I am going to talk about this more, not in this show, but in an upcoming show quite soon. Again, an example of something that's really hard. But I'm going to spell this out. I'm just going to tell it to you. I'm not giving you the reasons. I'm not giving you the explanations. I'm just going to leave this with you because it's something to think about. And again, using this as you develop your worldview and you evaluate different worldviews, you will see that this fact that I'm about to tell you explains a whole lot about the world in which we live and the phenomena you encounter in life. I'll tell you what it is. And that is that the act of physical connection between a man and a woman is essentially tantamount to a marriage. In other words, it contains an element of permanence to it. If you've ever heard people saying, you never forget your first experience, your first occasion of being physically intimate with a person of the opposite gender, yeah, why would you? How could you? It makes perfect sense. For people in that situation, yeah, of course you remember. Why not? It was a marriage. Now, I know this is now making you shake your head in bewilderment, saying, no, come on, what are you talking about? So I just suggest that you let this idea into your heart, let it float around a little bit, mull it over, think about it, and realize that, yes, in fact, as I'm going to explain in the next couple of weeks, yes, in fact, this does explain a whole lot. When you realize that it's not as if it's possible to just go from one person to the next person to the person after that, and then suddenly say, oh, this is the one I'm going to marry. It's actually not like that. The first person is still in your bedroom, as it were. Okay? I know this can be disturbing, obviously, because most of us have lived lives, and this is just part of the human condition. Most of us have lived lives that we would do differently if we had a do-over and we knew then everything we now know, right? And so these things are sometimes painful, but just because something is painful doesn't mean we should reject it from our thinking, because at least it helps us become wiser people moving forward, more use to our families and our friends and our associates. So just think about that idea. It's a powerful and shocking one, but think about it, and love to hear your reactions if and when you do be in touch by email at rabbidaniellapin.com, which is also where you can sign up to become a happy warrior. And so please go ahead and do that also, and get your free copy of The Holistic You. It's an ebook that I've prepared for people who do wish to further their journey down the road of being a happy warrior. So until we're together next week, my dear friends, thank you for being part of the Rabbi Daniel Lapin Show. I thank you very much indeed for recommending it to other people. You've been doing a fabulous job on that. A lot of you must have been doing it because the numbers prove it, and I appreciate it very much. And so I wish you a wonderful week of strong and productive relationships with your faith, with your family, with your finances, with your friendships, and with your physical fitness. I'm Rabbi Daniel Lapin. God bless.